London, 1845. The letter slipped from Theodora Thorne's trembling fingers, fluttering to the worn carpet of her modest drawing-room like a wounded bird. Words swam before her eyes. Regret to inform you, father's outstanding debts, foreclosure imminent. 7 years a governess, 3 as a companion to elderly Lady Harrington, and now at 32, Theodora found herself facing complete ruin. Not just financial collapse, but the final death of a dream she'd reluctantly surrendered years ago, that she might someday have a home of her own. Miss Thorne, Mrs. Palmer, her landlady, poked her head through the doorway. "I've brought tea." Theodora hastily wiped her eyes and straightened her spine. "How thoughtful, thank you." The landlady's gaze fell to the letter on the floor. "Bad news, dear." "Nothing I cannot manage," Theodora replied with practiced composure, though inside she felt like a tower of cards one breath from collapse. After Mrs. Palmer departed, Theodora moved to the small window overlooking the rain-slicked London street. Carriages clattered past, carrying ladies in fine silks to balls and soirees, a world she had once belonged to, before her father's gaming had stripped their family of everything but their good name. Even that had tarnished when he'd taken his own life, leaving his daughter to shoulder his debts and whispers that followed. "You are a thorn," she whispered to herself. "You will endure, you always have." Yet endurance felt hollow now. For years she told herself that love and marriage were luxuries she could not afford, that independence and dignity were sufficient companions. But in quiet moments like this, when London's grey skies matched her spirit, the truth emerged. She had built walls not from strength, but from fear, fear that no man would want a penniless spinster with a scandalous father. The next morning brought another letter, this one bearing the seal of the Dowager Duchess of Halsworth, a formidable woman whom Theodora had met briefly at Lady Harrington's funeral. "My dear Miss Thorne," it read, "your reputation as a woman of impeccable character and considerable accomplishments has reached me. I find myself in need of a companion for my annual summer residence at Halsworth Manor. The position offers generous compensation." Theodora's heart quickened. The salary mentioned would cover her debts and provide security for months to come. With little choice but abundant gratitude, she pennied her acceptance. 1 week later, Theodora stood in the grand entrance hall of Halsworth Manor, her simple black travelling dress a stark contrast to the opulence surrounding her. Marble floors gleamed beneath crystal chandeliers, and portraits of stern-faced ancestors gazed down, as if judging whether she was worthy to walk their halls. "Miss Thorne," announced the butler, "Her Grace will receive you in the blue drawing-room." Following him through a labyrinth of corridors, Theodora rehearsed her greeting. The Dowager was known to be exacting, and Theodora could not afford to lose this position. The blue drawing-room was awash in afternoon sunlight. The Dowager sat regally by the window, her silver hair arranged perfectly beneath a lace cap. But it was not the elderly woman who captured Theodora's attention, but rather the tall figure standing by the fireplace. "Miss Thorne," the Dowager said, "may I present my son, Quentin Jasperton, the Duke of Halsworth?" The Duke turned, and Theodora felt her careful composure waver. He was perhaps 40, with midnight dark hair threaded with silver at the temples. His face bore the weathered handsomeness of a man who lived actively rather than posed in drawing rooms. But it was his eyes that struck her most, storm-grey and penetrating, as if he could see through her carefully constructed facade to the frightened woman beneath. "Miss Thorne." His voice was deep and cool. He offered the slightest bow, regarding her with what she could only interpret as suspicion. Theodora cursed deeply. "Your Grace." "Quentin has only just returned from his estates in Scotland," the Dowager explained. "He rarely graces us with his presence in London." "Mother exaggerates," he said. "I simply prefer the country to society's endless parade of matchmaking mammas and their daughters." The Dowager's lips thinned with displeasure. "At 43, it is well past time you secured the succession." An uncomfortable silence followed, during which Theodora studied the intricate pattern of the carpet. "Miss Thorne will be accompanying me to the Rutherfords' garden party tomorrow," the Dowager announced, changing the subject. "I find these social obligations tedious without intelligent conversation." "I am honored by your confidence, Your Grace," Theodora replied, though inwardly she quailed at the thought of facing society again. Years in service had protected her from such scrutiny. The Duke's gaze lingered on her. "You seem familiar with the ways of society, Miss Thorne." "I was fortunate to receive a gentleman's daughter's education, Your Grace," she answered carefully, "though circumstances have required I make use of my accomplishments in service rather than in drawing rooms." Something flickered in his eyes, recognition, perhaps, or skepticism. "Indeed, well, I shall leave you ladies to become acquainted. Mother, Miss Thorne." With a short bow he departed. Later, settled in her comfortable chamber, Theodora unpacked her meagre possessions. The Duke's scrutiny had unsettled her. She had encountered his type before, aristocrats who viewed those in service as somehow less than human, their pasts irrelevant, their futures predetermined. "It matters not," she told her reflection in the mirror. "I require employment, not his good opinion." Yet as she pinned her hair for dinner, she found herself wondering about the Duke's obvious reluctance to marry, despite his need for an heir. There was a wariness in his eyes that spoke of old wounds, not unlike her own. "Stop this foolishness," she scolded herself. "You are here as the Dowager's companion, nothing more." The Rutherfords' garden party was a riot of colour and conversation. Ladies in pastel silks strolled beneath white canopies, while gentlemen in impeccable morning coats discussed politics and horse racing with equal fervour. Theodora remained dutifully at the Dowager's side, fetching refreshments and facilitating introductions when memory failed the older woman. "Miss Thorne, is it not?" A shrill voice cut through the pleasant hum of conversation. "I believe we were acquainted some years ago." Theodora turned to face Lady Whitmore, a matron whose razor-sharp memory for scandal was matched only by her enthusiasm for sharing it. "Indeed, Lady Whitmore, you have a remarkable memory." Theodora's voice remained steady, though her heart raced. "How could I forget? Your father's tragic end caused quite the sensation." "Such a shame, really." Lady Whitmore's false sympathy couldn't disguise her gleeful malice. "Lady Whitmore, I believe the Countess of Avondale was hoping to speak with you regarding the charity bazaar," the Dowager interjected smoothly. When the woman departed, the Dowager turned shrewd eyes to Theodora. "I was aware of your background when I hired you, Miss Thorne. Society's memory is long, but its attention span mercifully short. Hold your head high." "Thank you, Your Grace," Theodora whispered, touched by the unexpected kindness. It was then she noticed the Duke watching from across the lawn, his expression unreadable. When their eyes met, he did not look away, but instead inclined his head slightly in what might have been respect. That evening, Theodora found herself alone in the manor's library, seeking solace in books after the emotional strain of the garden party. She had climbed the rolling ladder to reach a volume on the highest shelf when a voice startled her. "Take care, Miss Thorne, that ladder has caused more than one accident." She startled, nearly losing her balance before a strong hand steadied the ladder. The Duke stood below, looking up with concern. "Your Grace, I apologize for the intrusion. I did not expect anyone at this hour." "No apology necessary. The library is for everyone's use." He stepped back as she descended. "May I ask what you were seeking? Perhaps I could help." Theodora smoothed her skirts, conscious of her plain evening dress compared to his formal attire. "Wordsworth. I find his reflections on nature soothing after a day in society." Surprise flickered across his face. An uncommon preference among ladies of society, who typically favor romantic novels. "I am not a lady of society, Your Grace," she reminded him gently. "No, you are something far more interesting." He gestured toward two chairs positioned near the fireplace. "Would you object to company? I find myself curious about the woman who quotes Wordsworth and faces Lady Whitmore's barbs with such composure." Caution warned her to decline, but curiosity prevailed. "I would welcome it, though I fear you will find me disappointingly ordinary." His smile, rare and transformative, made him suddenly handsome. "I very much doubt that, Miss Thorne." Over the next hour, they spoke of books, of Scotland's wild beauty, of music and art, never once touching on personal histories or painful pasts. Theodora found herself laughing for what felt like the first time in years, her guard lowering despite her better judgment. "You are remarkably well educated for," he stopped abruptly. For a companion, she finished for him, or for a woman. For anyone, he amended smoothly. You speak with conviction and insight. My father believed daughters should be as thoroughly educated as sons, she explained. It was perhaps his only lasting gift to me. The Duke studied her face in the firelight. Lady Whitmore's comments today, they referred to your father's death. Theodora stiffened. Yes, he took his life when his debts became insurmountable. Society has never quite forgiven either of us, him for the manner of his departure, me for being his daughter. Society, he said with unexpected bitterness, is remarkably adept at judging circumstances it cannot possibly understand. Something in his tone suggested personal experience with such judgment, and Theodora found herself wondering about the secrets this man might harbor. It is late, she said, rising. I should retire. Of course, he stood as well. Thank you for the conversation, Miss Thorne. It has been refreshing. As the weeks passed, Theodora fell into a comfortable routine at Halsworth Manor. Morning walks with the Dowager, correspondence before luncheon, reading aloud in the afternoons, and increasingly unexpected encounters with the Duke in the conservatory, the stables, the garden paths. Each meeting seemed accidental yet inevitable, their conversations growing deeper, more personal. She learned he had fought at Waterloo as a young man and still carried a bullet in his shoulder. That he preferred the company of horses to most humans. That he had modernized his tenant farms and built a school for the estate children. In turn, she shared fragments of her own story, her mother's early death, the years spent in genteel poverty while her father maintained appearances, the quiet desperation of watching opportunities for marriage and family slip away as she aged. Yet always, she sensed he held something back, some shadow that fell across his face when marriage was mentioned or when certain topics arose. The mystery only deepened her fascination against her better judgment. One afternoon, returning from the village where she had posted letters for the Dowager, Theodora was caught in a sudden thunderstorm. She took shelter beneath a massive oak at the edge of the estate, watching lightning fracture the darkened sky. Miss Thorne, the Duke appeared on horseback, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. This is no place to shelter during lightning. The carriage house is just beyond that rise. Before she could respond, he had dismounted and was helping her onto his horse. I'll walk alongside, hold tight to the reins. They reached the carriage house breathless and drenched. It was empty save for vehicles and tack, the grooms having sought shelter elsewhere. You're shivering, he observed, removing his coat and draping it around her shoulders despite his own sodden state. Thank you, she managed through chattering teeth. The coat enveloped her in warmth and his scent, sandalwood and leather. He busied himself lighting a small stove kept for the grooms, careful not to meet her eyes. We should wait until the storm passes. Theodora nodded, suddenly aware of their isolation and the impropriety of their situation. Any servant might enter, any passerby observe them through the windows. A ruined reputation was luxury she could ill afford. Your Grace, she began hesitantly, perhaps I should attempt to reach the main house. Quentin, he corrected quietly. When we are alone, at least, I would prefer you used my name. The intimacy of the request startled her. That would be most improper. Impropriety seems a small concern when weighed against pneumonia. His smile was wry. But I apologize if I've made you uncomfortable. Not uncomfortable, she admitted, merely cautious. My position depends upon my reputation. Something like pain crossed his features, and I have thoughtlessly endangered it. No, she said quickly, I am grateful for your assistance. It's only that the world judges harshly, especially women without protection of rank or fortune. He finished her thought with unexpected understanding. Believe me, Miss Thorne, I am well acquainted with society's capacity for cruelty. The storm raged outside, but inside something shifted between them, a recognition of shared wounds, of defenses lowered. Theodora, she offered softly, my friends call me Theodora. His smile then was worth any risk to her reputation. Are we friends, Theodora? I believe we are becoming so, Quentin. Later, safely returned to the manor, with a story of having waited out the storm in the gardener's cottage. Theodora faced herself honestly in the mirror. She was developing feelings for a man as far above her station as the stars above the earth, a man who, despite his kindness, would someday marry a woman of suitable rank and fortune. "Foolish heart," she whispered to her reflection. "Have you learned nothing from years of disappointment?" Yet she could not regret the friendship forming between them, even knowing its inevitable end would leave her heart bruised. The Dowager's annual midsummer ball arrived, transforming Halsworth Manor into a wonderland of flowers, candles, and music. As companion rather than guest, Theodora wore her best gown, a simple blue silk remade from a dress she'd worn in her former life, and stationed herself near the refreshment table, ready to assist the Dowager when needed. She was arranging a plate of delicacies when a familiar voice addressed her. "Miss Thorne, would you honor me with a dance?" She turned to find the Duke extending his hand, oblivious to the shocked expressions of nearby guests. "Your Grace," she murmured, conscious of curious eyes upon them, "I am here in a professional capacity. And I am master of this house, requesting a dance with an accomplished woman whose conversation I enjoy." His eyes held a challenge. "Unless you find me objectionable as a partner." How could she refuse without causing a scene? Reluctantly, she placed her hand in his. "One dance, Your Grace." As he led her onto the floor, whispers followed like rustling leaves. The orchestra began a waltz, and his hand settled at her waist with proper distance, yet unmistakable warmth. "You dance beautifully," he observed as they moved in perfect harmony. "Another accomplishment from your former life." "My father insisted I learn all the social graces," she replied. He never anticipated they would become professional skills rather than marriage assets. "His loss is my gain." His gaze held hers with unsettling intensity. "You outshine every diamond-draped debutante in this room." "You shouldn't say such things," she whispered, though her heart quickened at his words. "Why not? It is merely truth." "Because truth can be dangerous when it crosses boundaries of class and circumstance." She met his gaze directly, "and because such compliments might be misconstrued by a woman in my position." His expression sobered. "I would never trifle with you, Theodora." "Perhaps not intentionally," she conceded, "but the world sees an unmarried duke dancing with a companion and draws its own conclusions, none favorable to my reputation." As the music ended, he escorted her from the floor. "I apologize for placing you in an awkward position. It was selfish of me." "Not selfish, merely forgetful of the world's harsh judgments." She offered a small smile. "Now I must return to my duties before your mother wonders where I've disappeared to." Later that night, unable to sleep, Theodora slipped down to the library. The house was quiet, the ball ended, guests departed or retired to their rooms. She was surprised to find the library door ajar, lamplight spilling into the corridor. Quentin sat slumped in a chair, an empty glass dangling from his fingers, his cravat discarded, his expression haunted. She should have withdrawn quietly, but something in his posture, defeated, almost broken, compelled her forward. "Quentin, are you unwell?" He looked up, his eyes clearing slightly at the sight of her. "Theodora, I apologize for my state, not the dignified duke you're accustomed to, I fear." She approached cautiously. "We all have moments when masks slip." "Some masks hide more than others." He set down his glass. "Did you enjoy the ball?" "It was magnificent," she said, taking the chair opposite his. "Your mother was pleased with its success." "And what of our dance? Do you regret it?" "No," she admitted, "though perhaps I should, for propriety's sake." He studied her face in the lamplight. "You are an extraordinary woman, Theodora Thorne." "In another life." "Please," she interrupted gently, "let's not speak of other lives, other circumstances. They serve only to highlight what cannot be." "And what cannot be?" he asked, his voice low. She met his gaze steadily. "You know very well. A duke does not court a penniless companion with a scandalous family history. He marries a woman of wealth and impeccable lineage to produce heirs and unite great estates. And if the duke finds such prospects unbearable compared to the company of a woman who sees him as a man rather than a title." Her heart constricted painfully. Then he indulges in momentary fantasy before doing his duty, as nobility always must. Quentin stood abruptly and moved to the window. You speak of duty as if it were simple, straightforward. But what of the duty to one's own happiness, to truth? Such luxuries belong to those whose survival doesn't depend on others' good opinion, she said softly. He turned back to her, conflict evident in every line of his body. Theodora, there are things about me you don't know. Things that would make you understand why he stopped, seeming to struggle with himself. Why you what? She prompted gently. Instead of answering, he crossed to her chair and sank to one knee before her, taking her hand in his. Why I find it increasingly impossible to maintain proper distance from you. Why your presence in a room makes everything else fade to insignificance. Theodora's breath caught. Quentin, please. I know I have no right, he continued. I know the world would condemn us both. But I cannot pretend my feelings are merely friendly, nor that I don't dream of a future where you stand beside me, not as a companion, but as... The library door swung open. The Dowager Duchess stood framed in the doorway, her expression thunderous. Quentin, Miss Thorne, what is the meaning of this? Quentin rose swiftly, placing himself between his mother and Theodora. Mother, this is not what it appears. It appears my son is making a fool of himself over a woman who depends on my charity for her livelihood, the Dowager said icily. A woman who has clearly forgotten her place. Your Grace, Theodora began, mortification flooding her, I assure you. Save your assurances, the Dowager cut her off. Pack your things. You will leave Halsworth Manor at first light. Mother, Quentin's voice hardened, you overstep. Miss Thorne has done nothing improper. Hasn't she, found alone with my son at this hour, in such intimate circumstances? The Dowager's gaze cut to Theodora. I took you in despite knowing your father's disgrace, and this is how you repay my kindness, by setting your cap at my son. Each word struck like a physical blow. I have never, Theodora began, but dignity prevented her from pleading. Mother enough, Quentin said. If anyone is to blame, it is I. Miss Thorne has conducted herself with perfect propriety at all times. Then you admit you have developed an attachment to her. The Dowager's shrewd eyes narrowed. Have you forgotten your responsibilities, the burden you carry? A look passed between mother and son that Theodora couldn't interpret, something beyond mere anger, something that spoke of old wounds and shared secrets. I have forgotten nothing, Quentin said quietly, but neither will I allow Miss Thorne to be maligned for my actions. Theodora found her voice at last. Your Grace, she addressed the Dowager, I will of course leave immediately. I thank you for your past kindness and deeply regret any appearance of impropriety. She turned to Quentin, keeping her expression carefully neutral despite the pain ripping through her. Your Grace, I wish you well. With perfect composure that belied her breaking heart, she curtsied to them both and left the library, her steps measured until she reached the sanctuary of her room. Only then did she allow tears to fall, silent and bitter, for dreams she'd never acknowledged until they shattered. By dawn, she was gone from Halsworth Manor, leaving behind only a neatly pennied letter of resignation and the pieces of a heart she had foolishly allowed to hope. London greeted Theodora with indifferent rain and crowded streets. With her modest savings, she secured a small room in a respectable boarding house and immediately began writing letters seeking new employment. Pride prevented her from explaining her sudden departure from Halsworth. Instead, she cited family matters requiring her attention in London. Days passed without replies. A week, two, her funds dwindled alarmingly. Then came the whispers. At first, just sidelong glances from acquaintances encountered in shops. Later, a former employer cutting her directly on Bond Street. Finally, the landlady's daughter brought home the gossip sheet that explained everything. Disgraced companion dismissed from ducal household, screamed the headline. The article beneath detailed Theodora's supposedly shameless pursuit of the Duke of Halsworth, her discovery in a compromising position, and her subsequent dismissal. It ended with a venomous reminder of her father's suicide and speculation that the apple doesn't fall far from the tree when it comes to moral weakness. The landlady, reading over her daughter's shoulder, cast a horrified glance at Theodora. By evening, a coldly worded note requested she vacate her rooms, as this establishment caters to ladies of impeccable character. Numb with shock, Theodora packed her few belongings and sought shelter with her only remaining friend in London, a former governess now married to a shopkeeper in a modest neighbourhood. "You may stay as long as you need," Agnes Weatherby assured her, ignoring her husband's obvious discomfort with harbouring a woman of suddenly questionable reputation. "A week, no more," Theodora promised. "Just until I determine my next steps." Those steps seemed increasingly limited. No respectable household would hire her now. Her remaining funds would last perhaps a month if she was extraordinarily frugal. It was in this darkest moment, contemplating whether she might find work in a factory or as a seamstress, that an unexpected letter arrived bearing the Halsworth seal. Her hands trembled so violently she could barely break the wax. Inside was a brief note in an elegant feminine hand. "Miss Thorne. Your precipitous departure has left certain matters unresolved. I request your presence at Halsworth House in London tomorrow at 2 o'clock. A matter of some urgency requires your attention. The Dowager Duchess of Halsworth." Hope and dread warred within her. What could the Dowager want, to warn her against speaking of what had transpired? To threaten her should she attempt to contact Quentin? Despite every instinct urging caution, Theodora found herself standing before the imposing facade of Halsworth House the following afternoon, her best dress brushed and pressed, her composure a fragile shell. The butler's expression revealed nothing as he led her through marble hallways to a sunny morning room where the Dowager sat alone, her back ramrod straight, her expression unreadable. "Miss Thorne," she acknowledged with a slight nod. "Please be seated." Theodora perched on the edge of a damask chair, hands folded tightly in her lap. "Your Grace, you wish to see me?" "Indeed," the older woman studied her with penetrating eyes. "I must confess, I underestimated you. I beg your pardon. I believed you were like so many others, a fortune hunter using feminine wiles to ensnare my son." The Dowager's tone held no apology, merely statement of fact. "Your departure without argument or attempt to justify yourself suggested otherwise." Theodora lifted her chin slightly. "I have never sought anything from your son except friendship, Your Grace." "A mistake, clearly, given our respective positions." "A mistake," the Dowager echoed. "Yes, but perhaps not the one you imagine." She sighed deeply. "My son has not been himself since your departure. He blames me for driving you away." "Perhaps rightly so." Hope flickered dangerously in Theodora's chest. "I'm sorry for any discord I've caused between you." "Are you aware," the Dowager continued, as if she hadn't spoken, "that Quentin was briefly married as a young man?" Theodora blinked in surprise. "No, I was not. It was kept quiet. The marriage lasted less than a year before she died in childbirth, along with the infant." The Dowager's voice softened slightly with old grief. "It nearly destroyed him." "I'm so sorry," Theodora whispered, heart aching for the young Quentin facing such devastating loss. "There is more." The Dowager paused, seeming to weigh her words. "The physicians afterward told him there had been complications, that the condition which took his wife's life was hereditary, and that any woman bearing his child would face similar danger." Understanding dawned slowly. "That's why he's never remarried. He refuses to risk another woman's life, even for the succession." The Dowager shook her head. "For years I pushed him, insisting duty must come before personal feeling. But watching him these past weeks, I've come to question my certainty." Theodora struggled to process this revelation. "Why are you telling me this, Your Grace?" "Because my son cares deeply for you, Miss Thorne. More than I've seen him care for anyone since his wife's death. And because I believe you care for him as well, beyond any advantage his position might offer." "I do," Theodora admitted softly, "but surely you see it changes nothing. Even without the risk you describe, I remain completely unsuitable." The Dowager's lips curved in a small smile. "Perhaps, but I find myself increasingly convinced that suitability and happiness are not always aligned. And in my advancing years, I begin to wonder which should take precedence. Before Theodora could respond, the door opened. Quentin stood in the entrance, shock evident on his features as he beheld Theodora. "Mother," he questioned, gaze moving between the two women, "what is happening here?" "I've been rectifying a mistake," the Dowager said, rising. "Miss Thorne deserved to understand why you've held yourself apart all these years." "You told her," his face paled. "By what right?" "By a mother's right to see her son happy," the Dowager interrupted firmly. "Now, I shall leave you to speak privately. There is much between you that requires resolution." She departed with dignity, closing the door softly behind her. Silence stretched between them, taut with unspoken words. "I searched for you," Quentin finally said. "When I discovered that vicious piece in the gossip sheet, I was frantic to find you, to make amends." "There was no need," she replied. "You bear no responsibility for my situation." "Don't I?" He moved closer, anguish evident in his expression. "If I had maintained proper distance, your reputation would remain intact. And if I had been stronger, I would have resisted the friendship between us, knowing where it might lead." She met his gaze steadily. "We are both at fault, and neither." "Theodora," he took her hands in his touch sending warmth through her despite her resolve. "My mother told you about my past, about the risk any woman faces in becoming my wife." "Yes," she squeezed his hands gently. "I understand now why you've remained unmarried. It was never lack of desire for family, but fear of causing harm. It would be selfish beyond measure to ask a woman to risk her life for my happiness or for the succession," he said bitterly. "I resigned myself long ago to a solitary life." "A noble sacrifice," she acknowledged. "But what of the possibility that your physicians were wrong? Medical understanding advances constantly." "I've consulted experts across Europe," he said, shaking his head. "The risk remains significant. I could never forgive myself if the woman you loved made her own choice, with full understanding of the potential consequences." She finished for him. His eyes widened. "You cannot mean—" "I mean that love without trust is no love at all," Theodora said quietly. "To deny a woman agency in determining her own fate is no protection, Quentin. It is control masked as care." He stared at her, conflict evident in his expression. "Even if I accepted your argument, and I'm not certain I do, there remains the matter of your position in society. The scandal would follow you as my wife." "Society's good opinion has never protected me from hardship," she replied with a small smile. "I find I value it less with each passing year." Hope dawned in his eyes, transforming his features. "Are you saying you would consider a life with me, despite everything?" "I am saying," she answered carefully, "that if you were to offer such a life, I would consider it with open eyes and full understanding of both its joys and its challenges." He pulled her gently to her feet, his gaze never leaving hers. "Theodora Thorne, you have shown me grace when I least deserved it, and courage when I most needed its example. I cannot promise you an uncomplicated future, but I can promise to face whatever comes at your side, if you will have me." "Is this a proposal, Your Grace?" she asked, her attempt at lightness undermined by the tremor in her voice. "It is the beginning of one," he replied. "The formal version would involve considerably more kneeling and poetic declarations, but first I needed to know if such an offer would be welcome." Theodora's heart felt suddenly too large for her chest, joy and fear tangled together. "It would be most welcome, though I suggest a lengthy engagement to allow society time to adjust to the notion." His smile then was like sunrise after the longest night. "Society will adjust or not as it pleases. I find I no longer care for its approval, only for yours." "Then you have it," she whispered, "now and always." He drew her closer, one hand rising to cup her cheek with exquisite tenderness. "May I kiss you, Theodora?" "Properly this time, with no pretense of friendship between us." Her answer was to rise on tiptoes, bringing her lips to his in a kiss that felt like coming home after the longest journey, sweet and certain and full of promise. When they finally parted, he rested his forehead against hers. "There will be difficulties ahead, My mother may have given her blessing, but others will not be so easily convinced. Let them doubt, she said. We know the truth of our hearts. Indeed we do, he smiled, and that truth is worth any challenge the world may offer. 3 months later, Theodora stood before the mirror in the bride's chamber of the small country church near Halsworth Manor. Her wedding gown, a gift from the Dowager, was elegantly simple, ivory silk with delicate lace at the bodice and sleeves. Agnes Weatherby, serving as her attendant, adjusted the veil with tears in her eyes. You look radiant, my dear. I feel radiant, Theodora admitted, and terrified. And impossibly happy. A gentle knock at the door heralded the Dowager's arrival. The older woman entered alone, her critical eye taking in Theodora's appearance. Perfect, she pronounced. Every inch a duchess. I'm not certain I'll ever feel like a duchess, Theodora confessed, but I hope to be a worthy wife to your son. You already are, the Dowager's usual austerity softened. I have something for you. A tradition in our family. She extended a small velvet box. Inside lay a sapphire pendant on a delicate gold chain. It has been worn by Halsworth brides for generations, the Dowager explained. I wore it at my wedding, as did Quentin's first wife. Now it is yours. Tears pricked Theodora's eyes as the Dowager fastened it around her neck. Thank you for this and for accepting me. My dear girl, the older woman said with surprising gentleness, it is I who should thank you. You've given my son back his hope, his future. That is worth more than any title or fortune. The church bells began to ring, signaling it was time. Despite the whispers that had followed the announcement of their engagement, despite the society matrons who had declined their invitations, the church was full, tenants from the estate, friends who had stood by them, even a few forward-thinking members of society who recognized love's value beyond convention. And waiting at the altar stood Quentin, his face transformed with joy as Theodora appeared in the doorway. In his eyes she read the truth that had changed everything, that love, freely chosen with open hearts and clear understanding, was worth any risk the future might hold. As she walked toward her new life, Theodora thought of all the false beliefs she had clung to for protection, that she was unworthy of love, that happiness was for others, that her father's disgrace defined her future. Each step toward Quentin was a step away from those shadows, into a light they would create together. The Duke of Halsworth took his bride's hand, his smile intimate and full of promise. Ready, my love. Theodora Thorne, soon-to-be Duchess of Halsworth, returned his smile with radiant certainty. For everything.